Welcome back to Rad JBI. I'm JB. In this video, I'm going to show you some details and some tips when it comes to installing our JBI suspension Showa Pro Shock DIY kit for the Honda CRFs. Next to me, I have one of our shocks. This is our JBI suspension demo shock. This is actually the Honda Works edition, so it has the 18mm shock shaft. However, the steps and tips I'm going to give you will also apply to the non-Works edition Hondas that have the 16mm shock shaft. So it would pretty much be the same exact parts. It's just some parts will be specific to the 18mm shock shaft or the 16mm. So getting right into it, as you can see, I already have our shock disassembled and I have some of the shock assembly already laid out. One of the first pieces you're going to get from us is a new JBI black bumper. That'll be the first item that we ask for you to install. And then after that's going to be our bump stop cap. A lot of this is going to be repetitive because a lot of you already know how to build shocks. But again, I just want to show you some of the finer details. With our kit, we're also going to give you a new O-ring and a new seal for your seal head. To save some time, I've already installed that into our seal head. And again, a lot of you probably already know how to do that. Cool. So next we're going to put on our top out plate. Now in stock form, we have our top out plate that we're going to reuse and also a small metal shim. This shim goes on first onto the shock shaft, and that is actually what our top out spring touches against. So we're going to maintain using this OEM shim and also the OEM backing plate. You will get two sets of shims from us. One is in for compression, one is for rebound. An easy way to identify that is to look at the diameter of the shim and match it up with the compression side of the piston. These shim stacks will be custom built depending on the information that you give us. So just like the custom settings you would get during a JBI suspension revalve here at the shop, you're going to get those same settings, but packaged up into this nice DIY kit. So now that I got the zip tie cut off, we can go ahead and put this shim stack on. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is take this compressed air and just blow off the shims a little bit with some air to get out any dirt or debris that may have gone in there, because it's really important that this is free of any of that and it's clean. Cool. So we can push down on our shim stack and we don't hear any crunching sound. That's a very good thing. That means it's clean and there's no debris inside of our shims. Next up is going to be the piston itself. I'm doing the same thing with the compressed air. I'm not too big on surfacing pistons unless there's a lot of wear on the surface. Reason being is a lot of pistons are dished right out of the factory, and it's important we maintain that dish. It helps kind of preload the shim a little bit and make it seal better. But if you do have a lot of wear on your piston face, then do feel free to go ahead and surface it against some really high grit sandpaper, something like at least a 400 grit. Now, a lot of you should already know how to determine which side is compression and which side is rebound on a piston. If you don't know how to do that, please stop installing this kit and seek out some better help. And then next, we're going to install the rebound shim stack that we're also going to provide you with too. And just like we did on the compression shim stack, we will also blow off the rebound shim stack. So lastly, we're going to reuse the washer / spacer that was already provided in the original setup, or already in the shock absorber. Now, when it comes to this last part right here, we want to make sure that this washer sits above this shoulder. If it sits below it, when we tighten the nut down, it's not going to fixture or fasten this assembly to the shock shaft. It'll allow it to rotate. So again, it's very important. Look at this, compare this to the height. I'll let you come over and get a close-up on it, but we want it to be at least a little bit taller than that. So when we put this on, so that one's just right on the money. Cool, and then lastly, we'll provide you with a new nut for the shock shaft. This is the one for the M16s. If you have an M12 shock shaft, sorry, I'm referencing the thread. If you have a 16mm shock shaft with the M12 thread, you'll get a different nut from us. For these ones, we're going to utilize a torque value of 40 foot-pounds. This is for the large M16s, again, 18mm shock shaft. If you have the original production shock, which is a 16mm shock and an M12 thread, that torque spec is going to be 30 foot-pounds. We recommend using Loctite. You can use red or blue. We like the orange Loctite here at the shop. The way it is advertised, it has the holding strength of red, but the removability of blue, meaning you do not need to utilize heat in order to safely remove the nut and not, well, fuck up the threads. We'll throw some Loctite on there and then begin fastening our nut down. Cool, so again, this is an 18mm shock shaft. The threads up here, the valving goes, is an M16. So for those, we're gonna torque these to 40 foot-pounds. And again, if you have the smaller shock shaft size, which is a 16mm and an M12 thread, that is going to be 30 foot-pounds. Cool, so that is torqued perfectly. Now be very careful of any Loctite that may have come up during this assembly time, and make sure it does not go into the center of the shock shaft where the rebound needle goes. What I like to do is take a little bit of WD-40. Now I didn't see any go down there, but again, it's always good to be safe. Let's see where our bleed holes are. And we're gonna spray a little bit of WD. Cool, we got the WD coming out these holes. So that way we know for sure there's no Loctite in there to possibly fuck things up. So now that can sit for a little bit. Another key part of our setting and kit is going to be our JBI titanium compression adjuster piston assembly. That is going to replace the stock one that looks like this, and that can be found inside of your compression adjuster. It's going to be on the back side. As you can see, we've already replaced the OEM one. In order to do that, we're going to provide you with a shim that looks like this. We already have it bent. The reason for that is you're going to use this shim to put it into this curve or the radius of this part, and you're going to put it behind the circlip that holds this in place. You get it behind the circlip, pop it out, and that will allow you to remove this, the OEM compression adjuster piston assembly. Once that's out, just please set this aside, and you'll have your complete JBI titanium piston assembly, complete with our custom valving as well. And we'll ask of you to please install that back into here and then reinsert the snap ring or circlip that retains this into position. Awesome. Now that we have that done, what we can do next is we can go ahead and install this back into our shock body. Some advice I was given to while I was younger is if you love it, you want to lube it. So in this case, we're going to throw a little bit of grease on the O-ring here and also on the threads. Now, if it's biological and you want to lube it, then you want to hawk tui it instead of using grease, because grease wouldn't be good. Now, we have a specific tool for putting these on, but I realize not everybody does. So you can either use an open-end wrench to use these flat sides, or if you have, I love these Nipex. The reason being is it keeps the jaws parallel when you operate them. So you can grab that flat surface like this really well without the worry of it stripping. Again, typically where we do have a tool, but I realize not everybody's going to. So I'll show you some alternative methods for getting this reinstalled into the shock body. Now, I've never seen a published torque value from Showa on how tight to torque these compression assemblies back into the body. It's pretty big. I think this is about a 30mm diameter. But keep in mind, the housing is aluminum, so we have aluminum threads. So we're going to want to go pretty tight on it. But man, I couldn't tell you like an exact number. If I had to guess, I would guess around like 20 foot-pounds. When it comes to torques, it's really important to understand the materials that we're working with. Again, this is an aluminum housing. So aluminum threads aren't going to be nearly as strong as, say, if this housing was made out of steel. And lastly, I'm going to ask that you install a low friction piston ring. That's going to replace this composite band that goes right here. I like to do it once this is all assembled because it holds it in place. And there's going to be 2 O-rings underneath this band as well. Don't worry about cutting those, because with the low friction ring also comes some new O-rings also. Cool, so here's the 2 new O-rings that you will be provided with. Do your best not to stretch them out too much as we apply these on there. Cool, so we got 1 O-ring for each groove. And then lastly, we're gonna apply the piston band. It has a nice relief cut inside of it. So we want to spread that the least amount possible to get this over. Perfect, and that's gonna snap in place like that. When we install it, this gap is gonna get closed. So that's looking good. I think our next step now is getting ready to assemble it back into the shock body. So let's flip this right side up. Check it out, make sure it's all clean inside. When you clean out shock bodies, it's a good idea to do it right side up. So that way any stuff you're cleaning out falls out instead of into the shock body itself. This one looks pretty clean. I just see a little bit of dirty grease right on the inside where the snap ring is gonna go. So we're just gonna wipe that off. If you're wondering, this shock body was Cerakoted red. Why? Because I thought the old Hondas in the 80s that had a red engine and a red frame just looked really freaking cool. And I hadn't seen that in a while. So I figured let's make an all red shock. And I think it looks pretty cool on the Hondas. So with that mounted, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put a little bit of grease around our low friction piston band and also around our O-ring right here before we go ahead and we insert it into the shock body cylinder. So just a real nice light film, because we're going to assemble the shock dry since we will be bleeding it up on our Lava 7 vacuum machine I have right to our left. I realize some of you don't have that. You're going to be hand bleeding these. So the final stages of assembling the shock is going to be up to you and the resources that you have. Cool. So we got a nice coat of grease around the seal head and the O-ring, and a nice coat of grease around our piston band as well because it's currently dry. So when it comes to installing this, I'm going to pinch this a little bit to close this gap and help fit this piston band into there. Awesome. And next up will be our seal head. And we have a tool for pushing down the seal heads, but in case you don't, we have this item which sits like this. If you don't have one, you can definitely use your hands for the most part, but it's hard to get a little farther. So you could always use something like this and push down on the seal head this way. Just make sure when you do that, you don't push all the way down and have the tool hit the corner of the shock body. So just an alternative way in case you don't have the seal head setting tool. Cool, so we got that in. Now it's time for our snap ring. This is very important. The snap ring is black and it has this big gap that holds in the seal head assembly. The snap ring for your bladder is silver and it doesn't have as much of a gap. You do not want to mix those two up. As you can see, I left the bladder in during this. That's because we don't need to take it out for bleeding it on our bleed machine. And we also didn't need to do it for this service. Cool, snap ring is inserted. Now I'm going to pull up to seat our seal head against that snap ring and make sure that the snap ring is fully seated into its groove. This is very important. Snap rings are incredibly strong only if they're properly and fully installed. If they are not, then the strength of the snap ring holding everything in place drops by a lot. So again, it's very important to make sure the snap ring is fully seated all the way around. Cool, so that's the tips and tricks for installing the JBI suspension Honda CRF Pro Shock DIY kit. If you have any questions, please drop them below in the comments, or you can also give us an email or even give me a call. I'm the one JB that answers the phone and I'll be happy to talk to you.